when you don't address people's emotions and spirit, you are missing out on an enormous amount of productivity, an enormous amount of creativity, an enormous amount of intuition and higher intelligence that you are not getting from the people that work with you and for you. And you absolutely, it's the next frontier for me of leadership and business. And if you don't do it, you will lose talent.
Welcome to the Enlightened Overachiever, where we explore what it means to be a person living in a time of extraordinary change and intensity. I'm Lauren Shorter, coach, author, thinker, and guide for people at moments of complexity and change, which I think sums up where we are today. Let's get started. Ariane is an elite coach, speaker, author, and entrepreneur who specializes in helping people with big transitions. Honestly, usually I avoid interviewing other coaches, not because of rivalry, but because I'm more interested in learning from people who are not in my profession. And I've always found there to be something off-putting about the word coach in someone's job description, even though I am one myself. But Ariane is more than a coach. She has, in her extremely active life, been a championship swimmer, a strategy consultant, a media tech venture capitalist, a founder, entrepreneur, author of several books, including children's books, a motivational speaker, and more recently, a podcaster. Welcome, Ariane.
Thank you for joining us on the Enlightened Overachiever.
Nice to see you, Lawrence. I was telling a client this morning that I was going to be on this podcast, and I said, I'm not enlightened and I'm not an overachiever. And we both had a big giggle about it.
Nice. I think, on the other hand, it's hard to read your bio, to look at you online and not draw the conclusion that you might have been an overachiever at some point. Or let's not use the word over, just a bit of an achiever. Is that fair?
I mean, it's very fair. I'll say two things. One is I always talk about the other bio. I even nearly did a whole book called The Other Bio, or even another podcast called The Other Bio, because I remember so many times walking up on stage and having people read some version of the bio, and it's the LinkedIn bio or the professional bio or the website bio. And I was like, oh my God, these people have no idea who I am. And I would walk out on stage and I would tell them about the 5 horrible things going on in my life right now. And it's not that we can really get away from it, but I feel like people are craving more of the other bio to feel relatable and to feel like, oh, she's like me, or oh, she gets me, or I'm all about being equal to people, not being kind of higher or lower. I just feel like it's such a guiding thing for me, which is where's the equality as human beings more than sort of the achievement. So with that said, with the other bio, which I'm very happy to talk about at any time, I used to think that the achiever and overachiever was the main program that had been instilled in me as a child. And it was sort of the loyalty to the family, and my father in particular, was that achievement was what I was here to be and do. It started with achieving in sports. I was an international professional swimmer. And then my parents' marriage was falling apart. I decided that because I couldn't fix it and solve it and create any change there, that I would go ahead and overachieve so that I wasn't going to be a problem for them and that they didn't have to worry about me, and that it was my ticket to freedom because I never wanted to sort of depend on that being my future because it was so unstable growing up. And so, I graduated at 16 from school. I was in a rush. I graduated from university at 19. I was in a rush to make money, not depend on my father, not be sort of in the same emotional place as my mother. So it was driven in some ways by not positive things. It was driven by the fear of getting away from something more than it was going to make me feel good. And that was the beginning of quite a big launch into starting work for a big consulting company at 19. And I would say the thing was I was in a rush and I was in this chronic self-sufficiency, which is I'm not going to depend on my parents. which led to some wonderful things. And it also led to some hidden trauma and things that I've had to kind of unwind for myself and go, was it about achievement? Was it about rushing? Was it about not depending on other people? Of course not.
I remember, I don't know if you ever came across or knew about Chris Evans, because there was a British thing. Do you remember Chris Evans? He was a big...
Rings a bell.
Yeah, he was a very loud, brash, red-haired British broadcaster who was at one point unbelievably famous in the 1990s. And he kind of reinvented the whole format of the chat show. And he's ended up in radio quite successful. But there was a period of time when he was all over everything and all over the news, and he was young and he was a bit dangerous and exciting. And he said in an interview, and I never forgot this, when he was talking about his childhood, his father died when he was 10 or 12, something like this. And he said it was a thing that was so terrible that I knew that I just had to start running. And if I kept running, I might never have to deal with it. And I'm still running today. And it just reminded me of that sense of running away from something and how it can fuel extraordinary ambition.
You're right, Lawrence. I mean, I started swimming as a place to be alone and to be away from fights and shouting and the unknown and the unpredictability of what was happening at home. And I felt very safe in the water. My coach at the time had so much belief in me. He'd also make me do, 2,000 meters of butterfly, which was my stroke. But, at 8 years old, I would wake up at 4:45 in the morning by myself. My parents were still asleep. My brothers were asleep. I would sleep in my swimsuit just to get an extra 2 minutes of sleep and to make sure it was warm before I hit the cold water. My coach would pick me up, because I was 10 minutes away from the swim training place at 4:55 in the morning as an 8-year-old. I mean, that's kind of crazy. And I did that for years and years. And I swam 2 hours before school, 5 to 7. And sometimes an hour and a half after school, 5:30 to 7. And the part of me that did that, I think, wanted to be alone and wanted to just be internal and wanted to not have to talk to anyone. And those two parts are still there today, many, many, many decades later, which is I love being with people in the world, but I really need to hear myself and feel myself and trust my gut and check in with what the body is telling me.
Yeah. You did the swimming, you did the consulting, you were, as far as I can tell, extraordinarily accomplished in ways that some of my listeners would recognize and others wouldn't at all, because it's almost like a tribal thing. You go to a great university, you go to a premium consulting firm, top 3, you go to Stanford, you were in venture capital with Time Warner. Then you founded your own business. And at some point, you became all about personal growth. You became about transformation. You became about change. And you had your whole thing around change. And that was your thing. And that happened quite early, right? Is that correct?
It did. It happened. I mean, I left Time Warner. I was 31, 32 years old. Yes. So early in the sort of, crisis transition moment of life. I'd been told that being a female partner in venture capital was it. It was the top of the ladder. And I thought I would be really happy to have gotten there. And I remember the day that they put a press release out and it said my last name, de Bonvoisin, named, managing director of Time Warner's new digital media $500 million fund. And it went on Bloomberg. It moved the Time Warner stock. And it was a really depressing day, Lawrence. I stayed at home in Soho. It should have been a really amazing, I've made it kind of moment. I called my assistant. I said, I'm not taking any calls. And I felt crushed. And it sounds crazy, but I realized then and there that it was the wrong press release. It was a horrible moment. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've been spending 14 years, right? I've given up part of my childhood, my teenage years. It felt like the wrong press release. It felt like it could have been anyone's name. And it just didn't feel like my name was meant to be on that press release. And all I knew at the time was it was something about Ariane starts schools in South Africa, or Ariane creates clinics in India, or Ariane launches charity to solve X. But it had nothing to do with me. And it had everything to do with service and contribution and doing something for humanity. And at the time, I was just like, wow. I didn't make a mistake. I don't call it a mistake, but I call it a giant wake-up call. And it was really hard because I spent 2.5 years, knowing that I'd been woken up and still going and still trying to find meaning and contribution. And granted, there's a lot of funds and a lot of VCs that do amazing things for humanity. But at the time, for me, that equation wasn't what it was. And it was my first glimpse that, you can do the me, 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 my loft and my boyfriend and my money and my this and my that. And it crashed at that point.
So I hear that as a moment in time, a moment of awakening, almost coming to your senses, as like, that's not right. Whereas conversely, throughout my 20s, when I was doing similar jobs, I felt like I was stuck in the wrong body and I kind of knew it. Was it really just a kind of moment of truth that you hadn't been expecting? And then I guess there's a follow-on question, which is, how come that doesn't happen for other people?
I wasn't expecting it because I honestly had bought into the external narrative that I was doing the coolest flipping job and that it was so hard as a woman to be in venture capital. And I was 28, 29 when I was made a partner in a venture capital fund. I mean, most people are like, what a dream job. I speak to college grads and I speak to people coming out of business school. It's still a dream job for people. It just wasn't my dream job at the time. So the narrative came crashing down. It also came crashing down in my personal life because I was engaged to a guy and I thought he was the right guy, but that's a whole other story. And I also broke off that engagement because the narrative of the kind of man I've been told to be with was also very strongly injected into my veins from very young. And so I feel like I had to revisit in some ways all these consensus consciousness narratives that I was told would make me happy, and I was getting progressively further away from that. So it was a surprise. I tell you what wasn't a surprise is that I didn't feel very healthy. And for you talking about not being in the right body, my body started giving me a few little wake-up calls. I started putting on weight. I started getting really bad eczema, which I've never had before. To me, eczema is like the fire and the anger and the body is just trying to wake you up. Instead of slapping cortisone on it and pushing it back in, I was like, wow, what is going on between my inner world and my outer world that is so in conflict? And then I was like, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And then, just to sort of tie the story as a loop. So what happened after 2.5 years? Like, what was the moment that I quit? I woke up in my loft in Soho and I was covered in eczema. I had it on my face and I was just like, what the hell is going on? Said I wasn't going into work, walked myself to a clinic on 6th Avenue in New York City. They took one look at me and they put me on 2 drips. They put one cortisone drip and one antihistamine drip. So people who've ever had extreme allergic reactions, sometimes they give you a shot in the bum too. But no, they put these two things on me and I'm sitting there by myself looking at these 2 drips and going, oh my God, I'm allergic to my life. But then I thought, and I made a decision then and there that has guided my whole next 20, 25 years. I said, no job and no man is ever going to get my health. And basically within a month from there, I had extricated myself from work and I had broken off an engagement.
And this was 2 years after the press release, was it?
2.5.
2.5 years after the press release, yeah. If you look back when you went on to create your business and do all these inspirational things, what it was in your own background or ancestry even that might have created the soil for that?
It's a great question. I wanted to come back to that. I think it's 2 things for me. I think because I was an athlete, I've always been in my body. I know what my body feels like. I know when it's strong. I know when it's fit. I know when it's weak. I know when I'm lying to myself. I know when I'm not getting enough sleep. I know when I'm telling myself something that's rubbish. I know when I'm faking. I know when I'm not being authentic. It's just, I'm much more in my body than kind of here. And I don't think you have to be an athlete to live in your body. I just know that that is the safest place for me to be, even though it doesn't always tell you what you want to hear. I also know that in my background, I grew up in 3 continents, right? I was born in the US. I have French, Belgian parents, and I spent my childhood in Asia. And when you grow up in 7 countries across 3 continents, you don't have an external home. And I've always been told, oh, you don't have a home and you don't have roots. And oh my God, that's so weird. Oh, you poor thing. And I've really had to feel into what that is. And my body is my home, right? That's the one thing. It's the most consistent. It's with me all the time. It's the most safest place to be. And so I think my body was where I went for guidance and answers. And I don't think that's normal for people. I think most people go to their head and their mind is tricky, and it's filled with fear and fight or flight and common beliefs and parents' beliefs and religious beliefs. And the body does not hold all of that. So I think the one thing that made it easier for me is that I was in tune with the body going, sorry, sweetie, it's not your life, not your work, not your man, not your city. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, I think because my childhood was, it was extraordinary. You grow up in 7 countries, it's extraordinary, of course. And I want to give credit to my parents for what they did give me. I think the thing that it made me go to was that I did go looking for something greater to attach myself to as a child and as a teenager, because it wasn't my parents and it wasn't 4 walls and it wasn't my grandparents or my cousins or a school or friends. So I went in very quickly, 14, 15, 16, looking for some sort of relationship to life, God, grace, the universe, to be my anchor. And so for me to be able to break off an engagement, leave New York, leave a big job, that was my safety net. It was like life has me, not my parents, not something else. But I do think that life has you. That is available to everyone, just as being in your body is available to everyone. It's not an academic thing. It's not an intellectual thing. That is available.
Tell me a little bit about what you created next in that part of your life. And then after that, maybe we can move on to a bit more general conversation about the world, because that's what my primary reason for doing this is, to create a bit of a shared language or understanding of where are we at actually, and where can we take all this wisdom and insight personally, which is, we're privileged, some of us, to have that. And how can that be something that is useful for everyone? But first, tell me about what you did next and how it rolled out.
Well, I didn't have a sort of plan. The plan I did know is that I needed to shift more of my identity. So it wasn't about a city change. It wasn't about a job change. It was an identity change. It's like how I saw myself and how I viewed myself and how the world had told me I was, right? I'm a Stanford MBA. I'm a this, I'm a that. And I was just like, I actually don't really know what that identity is. And so the first place I went to, and this is a longer story, I'm not going to get into it, but I did go to Italy because I wanted to go to a place that felt very feminine. And I'd been in cities and jobs that felt very masculine. And I felt very disconnected from the softness and the soul part of the feminine. And so I went to Italy, one-way trip, and I just decided to read books and journal, have lots of ice cream. I lost a ton of weight, even though I had more ice cream. I was having ice cream twice a day. Because the body was so happy, right? The body was relieved. The body was like, oh, now we can drop the weight of protection and, not being visible as to what was going on the inside. I really just let myself be in synchronicity. So someone would tell me about something going on in India, I'd go to India. Someone would tell me about a workshop in Australia or a silent retreat, I'd go to Australia. And I really let myself be guided as to where I felt I needed to be. But I will share that there were 2 things that were guiding that step at the time. One was I was obsessed with the subject of change because I had just blown up my life and made 2 giant big changes, right? I wasn't getting married and I wasn't going to stay in this job. So I became a little bit obsessed with people who had gone through change. Big changes, super hard changes, amazing changes, giant life changes that have been thrown on them. And so the people I was meeting along the way, I just started pummeling them with questions about change, not having any sense of what I would ever do with this. But I would say things like, Lawrence, what's the best change you've ever made? Or what's the hardest change you've ever been through? Or what's a change you'd really, really love to make, is coming for you? And I had a dozen of these questions, and I started recording these interviews, and I started writing them down, and I started looking for, why is Lawrence good at change and, Paul is not? And I just became a little bit of like a social experiment before the time. And long story short, I had 1,000 interviews at the end of a few years, men, women, ages, all types of changes. And I started seeing patterns, and I started seeing principles of why some people are really good at change and why some people have a really hard time, why some people initiate a change, some people never will, why some people get over a horrible change, and some people go into victim and being punished and abandoned. And from there, I started following some of my loves. I love writing. I love interviewing people. And very long story short, I met someone at the TED conference, and I shared pretty much a version of this. And she said, I want to write a story about you and about being able to change and what's possible. And she goes, I want to write about your research, and I want to write about you. And she was the editor of Oprah magazine. And that was the beginning of life going, here we go. And I got a book written, and I started a business helping people through life changes. And I did workshops for companies and going through life changes. And I've helped kids and teenagers going through change. So change was one of the common things that, again, it was more helping myself. I was like, oh my God, how do I deal with all this change? But the second one was, and it's what I said at the beginning, the thing that was most missing in those big jobs with a sense of meaning, contribution, service. I'm doing what my soul chose to come back to do. And what was missing there was, show me how I can help, show me how I can serve my fellow human beings. We really are not here just for ourselves. And the more aligned we are with other humans, the happier we're going to be. It was so clear to me in my early 30s that I was like, I didn't know how I was going to do it. I could have gone to charity. I could have gone back to corporate. There wasn't a plan. But again, that's where I sort of was like, life has me. I need to just walk and keep making progress and keep opening the door that's in front of me, or taking the call or responding to the email, and just seeing where it unfolds. And I'm still in that place, Lawrence. I'm totally still in that place.
You're in that place, and are you incredibly good at change now?
Oh,
I mean, you're a change teacher. So tell me how, or is it one of those things where you're the one who's most challenged by it, so you have so much to teach because you're learning all the time about it?
I think two things can be true at the same time. I would never call myself a change expert. I think that we all have gone through an enormous amount of change. My changes are different to yours. I think we all have a change resume or a change CV. I mean, I look at my husband, he lost his father in 3 months to cancer at 18, and he lost his brother in a crazy accident. Is he better at change than me? He definitely has gone through deep trauma around grief and sudden death. So I would never put anyone on a hierarchy of being good or great or better or an expert or a teacher at change, because I think everyone is given something that is there for them. And I don't even want to say to make them grow, because I'm so over the whole, like, it's here for my growth and we're in a school. And I don't even believe that anymore. I used to believe it. We're here as a school, and it's an earth school, and we're here to learn and grow. And I sort of go, I just don't think that's what we're here for. I think we're here to remember, which is much sweeter and softer and lovelier than I'm here to learn and grow and be in a school for the next 50 years. I think we're here to remember. I think we're here to remember more of our soul agenda than our ego's agenda. And I think we're here to remember that we're all equal and we're all part of some form of divinity. We don't all call it the same thing. And we all have very similar struggles and very similar inner worlds. Our external worlds look very different, and we're all very, very similar. So I think we're here to remember. We're here to remember to have fun. We're here to remember to connect. We're here to remember to feel our hearts.
What do we need to remember about change then? This is just my trying to be clever way of saying, can you tell us a little bit about what you learned about change? I mean, one of the things you said was why some people able to make a change and others aren't, which is not your current live work, but it feels like it's the work that runs through your whole life.
Of
So
course. So the way I structured the book was around these 9 principles of change, right? Because publishers, they like the 7 steps and the 9 principles and the first 30 days. And, I had lots of thoughts about whether we should or should not do that. But they were like, you want this book to be a mainstream book, so you need to come up with 9 principles. So I came up with 9 principles. The principle that I found the most beautiful and the most incredible, and is still very much the through line of my life now, even with this podcast that I'm launching, is that people who are good at change have a spiritual side. And they didn't all call it the same thing, but they all said there's something bigger going on here. Whether they'd lost a child or started a business or made $1 billion or been raped or been adopted or gotten divorced or had prostate cancer, they all said some version of there's something bigger going on here. And, some called it God, and some people prayed, and some people were angry at this thing going on. But they were all able to point to something that was bigger than they could understand and question. That was probably the most fascinating principle for me. The other thing that was fascinating was people who really, again, had either initiated change or gotten through it in a good way or in a productive way. They all got to a place where something good had happened from this change. And so when I started testing this principle, I would ask people, I'd be like, what good came from this? There were times I thought they would throw a cup of coffee at me. And actually, no, they were like, you know what? Here's what happened from this cancer diagnosis or from the loss of my child or from whatever. And I thought, wow, I don't call that resilience. I call it chosen optimism. You have to choose it. It doesn't come naturally. You actually go, something good. I've just lost my job. I'm getting divorced, or I've just been diagnosed with something. Something good will come from this. And it is, I call it the change guarantee. It's one of the change principles. It's principle number 2. The change guarantee says that from this change, something good will come. And when you look for it, and that is the GPS you set for yourself, it will find you.
I just wanted to make one point about that. It's a challenge, really. I'm only challenging the resilience point you made. So I'm of that school, and I've always been that way. And it's, I think, a coping mechanism I developed in my childhood, teens. I was gently mocked for being, he always looks on the bright side. And because they were grown up, they could see that possibly I was using it as a way of, shortcutting, feeling the grief or the tragedy of certain things. Now, I've become aware that that is not everyone's MO. And for example, my wife, she won't have that. She's like, no, I want to feel the full, loss, the full sorrow, the full grief. I don't, and even if I dare to say, something good will come of it, or, it's all
she'll throw a cup of coffee at you.
Yeah, because she's like, that's not the point. That's, first of all, I don't think that's true, because I think that's a form of denial. And secondly, it's denying me the full feeling. So I just wanted to come back with that.
No, but I love that, because to me, 2 things can be true at the same time. And I think we exist in this unidimensional world where it is not my MO to be positive or optimistic. It is not. And I still struggle with it. So when I say it's a chosen optimism, it's because it does not come easily to me. And I grew up in a family where something was always wrong, always missing, always hard, always sad, always angry. It was not a coping mechanism for me. What I did was to become like my parents, because I desperately wanted to fit in, at least in some ways. So I still look at life, and I'll go into a hotel room and I'll look at what's wrong. Or I'll be on holiday and I'll look at what's missing. Or like my MO is not that, Lawrence. So
I do both, by the way. So I am unbelievably critical and picky.
It's
There's always something wrong.
To me, it's the pendulum, and it's me kind of going, I would like to be centered, where I feel the full emotion and the full grief, and the fullness of what your wife would feel. And then there's a sort of like, once I've emptied all that air out of the balloon, then I can maybe fill it up so that the hard stuff in the balloon, and I let all of it out like in a big way, then I could choose to blow up the balloon maybe with something that's a little bit more, you know what? there is maybe something beautiful, miraculous, magical I can't even possibly see that's going to come from this. But I get to choose what's going back in.
Yeah, makes sense. I'd like to just ask you about privilege for a moment. Privilege can mean lots of different things. It can mean, how we're born, financial means, upbringing, education, but it can also mean just the privilege of having the time and space to explore certain aspects of ourselves. As you say, you talk to 1,000 people or more about change, and I'm sure you've spoken to many more since as you've been giving out your work. Is it a level playing field when it comes to the possibility of change, transformation? And the Maslow's hierarchy would say, no, you've got to, if you're surviving, you're surviving. You don't earn that right until you've secured whatever it is. But I don't know if that's true. So I'm curious about your observations.
So the last principle of change is the principle of action. And there's a reason it's at principle number 9. It's not principle number 1. And I feel like the action principle might have some privilege attached to it. So if you've got a health diagnosis or you've lost a job, you getting the best health treatments, alternative and traditional, comes with privilege. You networking for your next job comes with privilege. You being able to move when you've lost your house comes with privilege. So to me, the action principle comes with privilege. I think all the others do not. And, there's a principle around emotions. I think the people who have less privilege are actually much more in touch with their emotional side. And I will say one thing, which is all change is emotional. All change is emotional. And because all change is emotional, the people who are the most emotional are actually the ones that navigate change better than others. And the people that feel their emotions more, credit to your wife, get through change quicker than others. Because typically some people kind of skip the steps and they'll go to the actions of change. And then they stuff down the other stuff that eventually comes up for healing at some point. So to me, the mindset can be privilege. But I also know that in some of those privileged environments I've been around, the mindset is not one of sweetness and wonder and grace and magic and miracles and beauty and awe, which is a lot of what you need to start resting into when life doesn't go your way and when you realize you're not really in control. I think the privilege feels like you're in control. The people who don't have privilege know that they really are not in control. And actually, change is all about not being in control.
Yeah, my observation is that we're dealing in a world which, of course, as always in all of history, is to a large extent, shaped by what you'd call the elites. And while you could say that you would expect greater access to opportunities for personal growth and so on, and the reality is that often those who are working at the apex of business, government, society, wealth, etc., are actually the most burdened by the need to repress or deny their own feelings and are most intensely suffering and stressed and stressy and tense and controlling and all that lovely stuff and using all sorts of things to medicate that. I'm not yet noticing that people who are poor and less privileged are doing any less of the self-medicating. I think it's a universal right, in a world that's not set up to be healthy for everyone and it's exploitative. I'm now curious about where you see hope or possibility in the future with regards to a system which is so tightly controlled by the parts of us that are scared. And in particular, the parts of those who are in control of the world, as it were, who don't feel in control, of course, but who sort of are. I suppose there's lots of different questions packed into that one, but maybe you could riff on what
it's a lovely question. For one, I meet you absolutely in the people that I know and people I work with, where there is a sort of belief that feelings, spirit, emotions are not a welcome part of leadership or business or work. And I think it couldn't be further than the truth. And I think that when you don't address people's emotions and spirit, you are missing out on an enormous amount of productivity, an enormous amount of creativity, an enormous amount of intuition and higher intelligence that you are not getting from the people that work with you and for you. And you absolutely, it's the next frontier for me of leadership and business. And if you don't do it, you will lose talent.
How do you, if you're a CEO or a CHRO or How do you address feeling? So how would you go about it? There's a difference between spirit and feeling, of course, or soul and feeling, but how would you prescribe that?
To me, it's not a prescription, it's an allowance. It's like when you have a child and they're allowed to be angry, they're not going to grow up as an angry human. Okay. And for parents listening, if you don't want repressed anger in your teenager and adult future children, you need to make anger permissible at home. And I was never allowed to be angry. So guess what? I've had to massively deal with anger. I was also never allowed to be sad. So guess what? I've had to massively deal with grief. So it starts very, very young. So to me, it's not a prescription, it's an allowance. That's number one. And the second thing I would say is we have no idea the humans that we work with. We have no idea. And I mean that from, do you know what's happening with people's parents? Do you know what's happening with people's children? Do you know what's happening with people's past? Do you know what's happening with people's health? We have no idea. I know people who've worked 5, 6, 12 years with people, and they have no idea. And so to me, we always laugh and say, well, we spend more time at work than we do with our husbands, wives, and children. And yet we know them a lot less. So if I was in any of those positions, I would have environments where not only do I go first, and I would say, here's what's going on. My mother hasn't talked to me in 5 years. Guess how relatable I become? I become relatable because probably everyone in their life has someone who hasn't talked to them that is a wound and it is painful. And now people go, wow, I had no idea. Do you see, it doesn't make me less or more of a CEO or leader. It just makes me real and authentic. And it's the truth for me. It is the truth. I didn't make that up. Or if I say, I've had 2 miscarriages, not shush, shush, and, I'm not going to tell anyone that. And everyone kind of goes, wow. Now there's a holding of humanity in addition to the fact that we want to build a business and raise funds and travel and make a difference. But to me, when you expect people to check their feelings and life and emotions and everything else going on and leave that part somewhere else before they go to work, I think you're getting half a human, which means you're also getting half of a productive, emotional human. And all work is emotional, raising money is emotional, getting deals is emotional, dealing with hard times is emotional. I didn't coin this phrase, but to me, intuition is the highest form of intelligence. And most people are not even scratching the surface of accessing their team's emotional, intuitive intelligence. They're not. They're getting the brain, they're getting the mental. But when that brain and the mental is, 5, 8, 10, 12-year-old traumatized child trying to do a board meeting, that's very different than really accessing the intuition about a merger or about who to hire. Or I say to all my clients, at the end of all the due diligence and all the work and all the data, go around the table and say, what does your intuition say? What does your intuition say? With no justification and no explanation, because intuition cannot be justified and explained. And just listen, bring it into the meeting. That's what I would do as a CEO, leader, CHRO. It's like the mind says, yes, yes, yes. They're, ex-Amazon, ex-Google, ex-Goldman, ex-Blackstone. And there's a part of you that just goes, no. Who's going to win?
And if all these CEOs and board members and Googles and Amazons and Goldman Sachs, if they were by and by to be following their intuition, would we be living in a better world, a fairer world, or would we just be living in a world in which those people who control the means of production and, extract rent are just doing it more effectively?
I mean, if I could wave a wand and everyone was a lot more in touch with their intuition, not only in touch, but followed it, I think we would have a much more aligned and spirited world. But that's because of my own personal belief, which is I believe that intuition comes from a higher place of intelligence. Call it cosmic, divine, whatever. I don't think intuition comes from our limited capacity. And so I know from personal experience that when you don't listen to your intuition, it gets flippin' painful and you pay a cost, whether it's with the stocks you buy or the relationship you started that you knew was wrong. I was around for the AOL Time Warner merger, and the people that were responsible for the deal knew that it was not the right deal. They knew it with a capital K, and they still went ahead with it.
Well, they would have made fat personal fees, right?
Yeah. So I feel, to me, that's where the remembering comes from. It's like, what do you remember by plugging yourself into a bit of a different direction and guidance for your life? I think people would marry the right people. I think people would, go into work that they love. I think that they wouldn't be lying to themselves. I think so much of mental health issues, not to do them any disservice, but there's a sort of lying to yourself. At some point, the body breaks down and just says, can't do this anymore. So if intuition equals your truth, I think more and more people living their truth, I think the world does get better. It's been scary because, following your intuition comes with huge consequences. Leaving big jobs, leaving marriages or relationships, leaving worlds, leaving religions that you've been told to follow your whole life. The biggest fear is breaking loyalty. And sometimes loyalty is with your parents or with communities. And it's like, just because you break the loyalty and that's not who you are anymore, doesn't mean you can't keep loving them and being part of it, right? There's a big difference between love and loyalty. I've had to disappoint a lot of people, including all of my family, who do not understand my crazy intuition. But I could not have done it. I could not have continued.
Yes. Tell us about what happened after first 30 days, or what's current for you. So I know that's a whole chunk of 20 years almost or more. Bring us up to speed with where you're at now, what your body of work is that you're bringing through at the moment. I know you're launching a podcast, but not so much the form, more what's the edge, what's the inquiry, what are you working with?
First 30 days started as a real desire for service and contribution, whether it's through the book, whether it's through the website. We had 60 different life changes. We had email newsletters to help people through change. We had podcasts, we had experts, we had real people's stories of the 60 biggest life changes. And it became a bit of an ego thing. It went from service to ego. We raised millions of dollars, and I had 35 people, and I was on the Today Show and Oprah and in the press, and we had hundreds of thousands of people on the site. And I lost touch a little bit with the service component and with the why I was doing it. And then we also couldn't monetize, to be honest. We weren't going to ask people to pay. It wasn't the right thing at the time, even though people have gotten used to paying for things like Substack now. So we had ad banners, and I felt like 50% of my job was selling ads. And I was really good at it because I'm really passionate about this subject. But I was seeing, the Visas and the Amex and the Chase and the Pfizers and anyone who could give us some money to put banners on a site. And I was like, this is not why I did it. I didn't want to shut it down because it was a service. We didn't raise a Series B for the round. And I decided I'm going to turn this into a nonprofit. I bought the company back from the investors. I let go of the team. And I said, I'm just going to give this stuff away. The content's available. It's still there. It's evergreen content. First aiders getting married, first aiders of having a baby. And I thought, there's another door for me. And it wasn't, the big giant exit. It was me exploring being an entrepreneur and me really exploring being of service. By now, if you're listening to this, what I do is when I go through big changes, I travel because the world is a bit of my therapy. And so I took a journal out. I also journal. That's also my therapy. And I wrote down 3 or 4 countries that I really wanted to go to. And I wanted to go to Australia. I wanted to go back to Hong Kong where I grew up. I wanted to go to Cambodia, and I wanted to go to Burma. Those are my 4 countries. And I went to Australia. I wrote another book in Australia. Then I went back to Hong Kong just to find my roots, right? Because again, it was where the roots. And then I went to Cambodia, and, destiny at that point takes over. And I met my husband in Cambodia in a temple. I wasn't looking for a man. I wasn't looking for a job. I was kind of looking again to reconnect with, I guess, what the next chapter is. I wanted to get even closer to the remembering of my soul agenda. I felt like I was unlayering it bit by bit. And I think today, we're 15 years on now from me having that trip in Cambodia and having met my husband. I think what was important to me back then was I didn't want to journey by myself. I know lots of people are completely fine, but I could feel for myself that I would be better walking this path with a beloved, and a beloved that shared quite similar spiritual beliefs about what we're here doing and how we're walking, and we're walking each other home. Not necessarily the same teacher's books, but that was a very important part of who I wanted to walk with. I got pregnant quite quickly. We had our son, Everest, who's now 12. And what became clear when I had children was that I wanted to do something for the tiny humans. I feel like that I'd done a lot for the bigger humans, the adults, but I was like, I need to do something for the tiny humans. And I did a book series for young kids called Giggles and Joy, which is 3 books, and they're life lessons for young children about navigating life. And I was like, this is a book series I would have loved to have. I just poured my whole creativity and heart and soul into helping parents who want to keep their children, connected to something in a different place. So that was the first thing that came out. I know I didn't want to rush back to work having just had my son. We tried to have more children. It didn't happen. I think the thread that's always been with me has always been this foot in both worlds. I even have an unwritten book on my computer called A Foot in Both Worlds. And it was a little bit of my story of the world of success and external and achievement and being a big person in the world and climbing Kilimanjaro and doing marathons. And, it's like, it was a part of me. But I was in the spiritual at 14, 15, just as strongly, right? It wasn't as visible. It wasn't as in people's faces. I was a bit in the spiritual closet, but it was just as strong. I mean, just because my boyfriends didn't know about it didn't mean that my whole life wasn't becoming more of that. But there was a competition between these two. It's like one of them has to win eventually. And I wrote the book for myself, and I felt more and more people were in these 2 worlds. And then it was just not 2 worlds, it's not 2 versions of yourself. It just really dropped very loudly. But I had to start seeing it as 2 worlds. So I understand everyone who still sees it as 2 worlds. But I find my thread now, now in my 50s, is about these 2 being 2 sides to the same coin, these 2 things helping. The success helps the spiritual helps the successful. That they could be synonyms. We can explore the definition of spiritual and success for the next 3 hours. And so for me now, it's all about bringing people who have both into a place, a collective, a community. It's what the whole new podcast is about.
Yeah, I get it. And it's very similar in a way to what I'm doing here with the Enlightened Overachiever. I'm bad with names. I mean, I fuss and fret about them long after I've fixed on it. And I don't like the title for a lot of reasons, because I'm not an overachiever and I don't want to be talking with overachievers, really. And I'm not enlightened, and neither is anyone else. But however, it does capture something of that duality that you were talking about, that dualism. To be different people in different contexts is hard, right? It's exhausting and ultimately pretty inefficient, and ultimately like a business killer if you're a coach or a writer, because people want you at least to embody, alignment and coherence. But I did notice right at the beginning, you talked about the alternative bio or the other bio. And so there's still something of a theme running with you, isn't there, of these 2 presentations, these 2 identities. There is still the identity of the successful Ariane, because it has a beingness. And then there's the bio, which you might lead with in a different way. I'm curious about how that dualism still lives or might live in you.
I feel like I don't hide anything. I just start with different things. It's not hidden. It's just not what I lead with. And it's a couple of things. One is I feel like to affect and help and contribute in some ways to people, which is my deepest wish and longing. You have to go meet them for where they are. And so we still live in a consensus where I think meeting them, with a little bit of what's important to them. And then it's just like fishing them out of this pond and kind of going, you know what, there's another pond over here. Is better than me hanging in this pond over here, expecting them to kind of jump over. It took me years to come up with the name for the podcast that I'm doing, The Spirit Collective, because I was like, wow, I'm really going to put a flag in the ground around the spirit. Am I really going to do it, right? And I'm really going to say that I want to talk to people about their spiritual path. And I guess that I was not ready to fully be out, because I have big clients who run $5 billion companies and big VCs. I'm just like, am I really ready? And I thought, you know what? If not now, when? And to me, the planet is ready. I am ready. And I need to be completely in my honesty. So it's not called the Success Collective. It's called the Spirit Collective, right? I don't talk to people. I go fish successful people in music and acting and sports and business and finance and whatever. I go fish for them and I go, we're not going to talk about success at all. We're only going to talk about your spiritual path. And the people that say yes, which is a lot, it's so refreshing for them to not talk about their successful path. But I do need to go fish in that pond for people to go, wow, she's not weird. She's not just wearing white and crystals and prayer beads and, yoga and a vegan. Some of those things I am, some of those things I'm not. But she's also like me. I'm married. I've got kids. I've got problems. I'm, in perimenopause. It's like she's also like me. I do need to honor that part. And I feel like the more of us, like you and I and other people, are not afraid of both bios. Which one do you want to talk about? We could have talked about either one today fully, no problem.
How often do you talk with your clients in these contexts, billion-dollar businesses, about God or the divine, as opposed to, say, feelings or intuition or yoga?
I think for all of us to develop appropriate language, whether it's with children, teenagers, men, women, people who've been traumatized, people who are business leaders, it is a new language, and it is vitally important because words and language are a tool of connection. And so there is not a whole bunch of spiritual stuff on my website because I would rather connect with people as a human being first, as opposed to I walk a spiritual path.
Yeah, agreed. And at a certain point, and I'm asking this as a practitioner, right, because I'm a coach. So at a certain point, do you introduce these concepts and how?
Absolutely. And I think that the clients that find me, they have a feeling that there is something deeper, bigger. And there are clients that I say, I don't think you should be working with me. I'm very happy to recommend you to, someone who has more of this foundation or more of this skill set, or is an ex-McKinsey coach, or, will give you your 6-month program instead of me feeling into what needs to come through in this particular call. So yes and yes. And I would say the word I use the most is probably their relationship to life, because it is the most neutral and everyone has it, and it doesn't create any disconnection or tension or mental anything. So it's like, what is their connection to life itself? And everyone can go there. And for some people, they will bring up the words and I will match and mirror their words. So whether they are Christian or Jewish or Muslim, or I've coached everything, or atheist. I had a big fancy New York City dinner the other night. I was the only woman. There was like 22 men. And of course I introduced myself. I mentioned the Spirit Collective, and I had 2 guys next to me going, I'm not spiritual at all, which is so lovely. I love it when people tell me they're not spiritual, because what they're telling me is I don't agree with the word, but they had all the elements of being spiritual without liking the word. It's just a feeling of being alive and a relationship to life itself. It's such a great conversation because to me, this conversation is not mainstream, right? We talk about stocks and we talk about AI and we talk about our kids and we talk about longevity and blood testing and peptides and cold plunges. And I kind of go, you know what? When the body feels really alive and when the body feels like it's living its truth, that is longevity, and it is passion in relationships, and it is what people are looking for on all the apps. I coach people to write very different profiles on all these dating apps because I was like, that's not you. What are you talking about? That's not you at all.
How often are you seeing that your clients need to, in order to move closer to aliveness, say no or goodbye to something or to finish something, as opposed to something subtle, hour by hour?
Great question. I would say it's probably more of the first. I think the deep truth that is trying to get people's attention sometimes can involve a big no or an ending or a closure or a life that they have never imagined for themselves. And that can feel overwhelming, and it does not need to be something you go through alone. And whether it's therapy or online, and sometimes when you're going through those moments of transition, it's not towards the people that know you the best that they help you through that, because they still want you as the person that has always been Lawrence, right? So I'll speak for myself. I've had to say a lot of big no's. And I also know that on a day-to-day, I'm constantly checking in with, not does this make me feel alive? I mean, now you're really starting to make me feel like I'm, superficially enlightened. That's not my question. My question is just like, is this a yes or a no? If my husband says, I don't know, let's go for dinner tonight, I'll probably check in. So I'm just naturally saying yes. I'll be, is this a yes or a no? And it might be a no. And I'll say, babe, it's a no. So it is a moment by moment thing, even just about the dinner or the party or what I should wear. I wore white and I was like, oh, I'm white against white. Maybe that's wrong. And I was like, no, this is a yes. I want to feel this. I feel this is it.
My observation is that you slowly earn the right to be able to do that moment to moment stuff by doing some of the bigger stuff along the way. Certainly in my case, I've had to say no in order to trust my more mundane intuitions.
Well done. I think one of the biggest fears I saw in people who didn't go through change was the fear of disappointing someone else. And because of that, they self-abandon. And it's like, I'm going to hurt someone. Someone's going to disapprove of me. And then you do 5-10 years of hurting yourself and disapproving and disappointing yourself. And I've done that, and it's familiar to me. And you pay the price for it either way. But I also say, I was saying this to a client this morning, she's thinking about moving back into New York City. And she's been thinking about it for 6 months. And I said, the time before surgery is much harder than the surgery itself. The time before the decision or the consequence or the change is much harder than the change itself. And it's up to you if you want to take 6 months or 6 years to decide. But that is harder. I mean, for people who've made the change, the move, the divorce, the leaving the job, it's intense, but the change is not the hard part. The decision's hard, but it's the time before that's really hard.
Interesting. Gosh, there's so much that I can tell of value to whoever's listening and will want to find out more and dig into it more in your work online and your books. I'd like to ask just one last question, which is sort of a double question, which is, as you look at the world now, as you look at the present moment, you can answer this very personally or very globally as you like, but what most worries you and what are you most excited by or feel most hopeful about?
I'm going to go with hope first, okay? I'm hopeful that the Knicks are going to win the basketball in New York. Beyond that, I'm hopeful that the kids are going to say no to the consensus mainstream mindset around a lot of things, around work, around money, around jobs, around education. I'm hopeful that their spirit and their connection to something greater is not going to be shut down. I'm hopeful that that can exist in a world of technology, by the way. It's not like I'm hopeful that all of that stuff's going to go away. Two things can be the same. I feel like there is something absolutely beautiful and magical and wonderful, as there is in all generations. But I feel like the generation of kids that are coming in, they are connected. And it doesn't mean that they are going ahead and praying, but they're connected to the trees and they're connected to the water and they're connected to their pets and they're connected to their friends. And we just need to get out of the way and just make sure that connection stays in place. It's not some big spiritual experiment. I am concerned about the level of health issues that people have. I'm very, very, very concerned about the friends that I have in their 40s and 50s who have died, who have brain tumors, who have eye cancer, who have cardiac arrests. It's nearly weekly, and I'm very, very concerned about it. And I am also curious and fascinated as to what is going on that has enabled this to such an extent that it's shocking. And so the physical body is important, right? But I know that my emotional body and my spiritual body are what create my healthy physical body. And so with people being obsessed with the physical body, I've seen people run marathons and cross the English Channel who are not here with me today. So do not only be obsessed with the physical body, you must be obsessed with the emotional and the spiritual body, because the body is one. And there's too much on the physical right now. I love it. I've done all of those things. I love the gold plunges and the oxygen chambers and the red light therapies. But I'm more obsessed with the other one.
Ariane, thank you so much. I didn't know what to expect, really, but it's been an honor to hear your story, to participate in your insights and the sort of golden threads that have run through. So thank you. I'm really grateful. Anything else you'd like to add or say about where to find you?
I mean, I want to acknowledge you because I don't have this conversation. It's not a mainstream conversation. This is not I've had this podcast interview before. So I'm excited about where you took me and the questions that you asked. Feels like a strong conversation. Feels like we're both ready for this kind of conversation. So I would encourage any future guests to sort of want to be in conversation with you, because you're also giving a gift to the person that's in the conversation. And yeah, the Spirit Collective podcast is what I feel is coming through most strongly for me. I think that these podcasts are twins. There's a collective of people like you and I, and whether they find you or me, it's like different doors into the same room, as I've often said. My books are all there. One thing I haven't talked about at all, if people are going through this, is I wrote a book about where spirituality and fertility come together, because there's such a fertility crisis and so many people want to have children and are not. And I feel like spirituality is a bit of the missing piece in the fertility puzzle. So for anyone who's listening to this, or if you know friends, who would do anything to bring in a child, that book is called Spirit Mama. It's not for everyone, but it's something that it's such a gift when someone can have the biggest joy and the biggest miracle. Lawrence, you have kids, I do too, that I wanted to give that to the world too.
Yeah. Thank you, Ariane.
Thank you so much, Lawrence.